All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know people are still coming in. If you have questions, please use either the chat box or the Q&A feature. I'll be keeping an eye on them. We will ask the panelists a few questions, and then I will leave the last half hour for all attendee questions. So we will take as much time as we can to answer all of your questions. And if for any reason we don't get to your questions, because sometimes we just have so many, I have put the contact information for myself and our panelists in the tip sheet, and the link is in the chat box. So hopefully we will be able to help you, whether it's now or in the future. So we have 4 independent journalists joining us today and 1 puppy, from what I can see. Thank you so much. Don't worry if your pets bark or something happens. We're used to it by now, so no worries for that. Attendees, if you raise your hand, you're asking to allow to talk with audio. So we won't be doing that right now, but we will be doing some Q&A through the chat boxes. So just I'm not ignoring you, but I want to make sure that we can get to our prepared questions first. All right. So let's start with, what would be your advice, top thing or top 3 things, whatever you want to share, for a journalist who is thinking about going independent that may not be independent right now? Mason, why don't we start with you?
Sure. First off, thanks for inviting me. It's been so long, Kat. If you guys don't know, Kat and I go way back. I think Kat was my first newspaper photo editor. That's like going back, I don't know, like 7 years ago.
7 or 8, yeah, I think so.
Man. So yeah, just thanks for inviting me, and it's good seeing everyone out here. Let's see. It's a pretty loaded question, I have to say. There's a lot I would recommend, and I guess I think main things that I would suggest if you're thinking about moving forward to as an independent journalist or freelance, I would look at where you are, what your market is, and how you see yourself fitting into that market. Because I think it's important to acknowledge, like, if you're going to San Francisco, which is what I did, I was like, okay, I'm going to be moving to the most expensive city in the country. How am I going to survive out there? And so just having kind of reality checks like that is important. Start off with a good emergency savings fund. I think 3 months is like minimum you should have. I think with COVID now, you should kind of reassess like what that looks like. I think, like, let's see, I have some notes here so I can keep on track. But yeah, I think like mainly breaking down your personal financing and just making sure that that's a reality. It's not, I think the first year is going to be a lot of adjustments, and it's different. It's going to be a different way to, have, it's a different lifestyle, different approach from what I went to, which was I was a newspaper photographer for a couple of years, and just going freelance allowed me to kind of reassess like what are my priorities in terms of my personal finance, my kind of lifestyle choices. I think mainly like when you're starting out is just really look into kind of how to set up your business. Because I think like you're not just a journalist, you are a business. And so what that means is that you should try to figure out like how you are marketable and how you can market yourself, how genuinely how you can figure out, again, going back to where your market is important. And for where I started my freelance career in San Francisco, I was mainly targeting a lot of tech companies and working with commercial as well as corporate. And so I was balancing kind of the act of juggling those 2 main income streams. And so it's going to be different in every sort of city that you go into. And I think just acknowledging the realities that if you do plan to live in an expensive city, you might need to have a second income stream, whether it's a restaurant or, for me, it was, I did a lot of commercial work. So I just think understanding that is really important. Yeah. I don't know. I can keep going with this question. This is such a loaded question, but I'll definitely give the other panelists some time to kind of chat about this, because I think we'll kind of start kind of repeating yourselves at this point. But
all right.
Yeah.
Do any of the three of you want to address this? Sarah, I think you have to unmute yourself. There
Yes.
you go.
Sorry about that. I was having a few technical issues. Was the question about what a journalist should do to prepare?
Yes, yes.
Okay. A lot of what Mason is saying. For me, I was kind of pushed into independent freelance after being laid off after a decade with the Chronicle, and it was out of the blue, and it's been a very, very fast, intense learning curve over the last year. And I would say start thinking about your brand now. If you haven't already, if you haven't been wherever you're working, if you haven't already been thinking about that, really start thinking about what that is and being consistent across all platforms. I think that's really important. And also making sure your networks, your networking contacts are in order. It was a really big scramble for me. I had all this stuff from when I was at the Chronicle, but it just felt very different. I'm still on the earlier side of freelance myself, and I've been learning a lot as I go over the last year. But branding and your networking, huge part of this.
Great, thank you. So why don't we go into our next question? So let's talk healthcare. Maddie, do you have any advice for those who either lost their job or are going independent and suddenly need to look at healthcare options where they don't work for a company that can provide it?
Yeah, I think going back a little bit just to the other question too, like really identifying if freelance is the right lifestyle for you is important, because if you're someone who craves any kind of structure in life, like this is not for you, like it is so inconsistent. You're going to have weeks where you're going to be working, every single day, multiple assignments, multiple cities, and then weeks where phone might not ring. You are a one-man band. So, I think if I broke it down percentage-wise, I might only shoot like 25% of the time. Everything else is like marketing and editing and like figuring out your taxes and your invoices and stuff. And like, I think sometimes freelance can be like pretty glamorized, and it is a good lifestyle for some people, but it's not for everyone. Like I just try not to sugarcoat it for people. And then leading into the healthcare question, I use Affordable Care Act here, Obamacare. And it is not cheap or easy to, get into. That's one thing with freelance. You don't have benefits, you don't have healthcare, you don't have 401k, you don't have any of that stuff. So you have to figure out how to do it on your own. So for me, yeah, I pay probably almost $500 a month for health insurance. And it's okay. It's nothing like great. So just like realizing the expenses of freelancing is really important before you go into it. And I would recommend having at least, if you can, I know this is really hard, but like at least $10,000 before you even start, because I mean, especially like during COVID times, you need, 3, 4, 5, 6 months to live on.
All right, great. Mason, do you want to add to that?
So I'm in the similar boat. Like I think any freelancer, you're going to be on an exchange of some sort. So I usually do highest deductible, lowest cost. I'm looking at those sort of plans. What my wife and I do, we both have HSA savings accounts, which I highly recommend looking into. It's essentially, it's a health savings account. And so you take that money, set it aside, and it's tax-free in, tax-free out. And so you then take that money and then put it back into the market, and then that money grows. And so what happens is you save receipts just for like the year's amount you want to, and you're paying out of pocket off of those things, whether it's any sort of medical receipt that you have. And once you want to pay that back to you kind of let that money grow over time, just like you would with any stock. And you can take that out tax-free. And so that's like the only sort of like market thing that you can do that is essentially tax-free out. And that's important to acknowledge, that it does require you to pay out of pocket, but it allows you to pay yourself back for those expenses. And that's something that I think is worth looking into if you are, going freelance.
All right. So next question, contracts and invoices. What is the most important piece of advice you would give to a freelancer creating a contract and or invoicing system to use with clients? Hannah, why don't we have you start with this one?
Sure. So hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a photographer in Philadelphia. And I guess some context is also I moved here from Canada, which is why I didn't really want to talk too much about the healthcare situation. And I'm married. So I think that's one thing I wanted to mention is a lot of also freelancers, they find different ways to make this work, whether it's being married or family, or I realize there's just different avenues to making these things work. So that's a side note. Okay, contracts and invoices. So when I first started, I think I was just using like a Microsoft Word or PDF, like just making my own PDFs. And then I quickly learned to switch to QuickBooks. I don't know if anyone else uses QuickBooks, but there's also Wave. And I feel like setting the tone, even if you're first starting out, like having like an official like invoice, I feel like sets the tone of being like, hey, I'm a professional. Rather than sending over like, I don't know, not that the homemade ones are bad, but I just felt like these ads just do it all for you. You just plug in the numbers and the client's, address, and it sends it to them too, and it helps you to keep track, which was also helpful. And also I think, and I use also, when I first started, I was using Google Sheets. So I love Google, like all the stuff Google gives, Google Drive, Google Sheets and Google Docs to keep track of all my clients and what they're paying me. And then when it got overwhelming, when I started to grow, I switched over to QuickBooks. Again, like you can plug in all your clients, keep track of your income, keep track of your expenses. And that's, learning accounting, like really basic accounting, whether it's with the help of a really good financial planner or accountant, I think that really helped with my kind of workflow when it came to money and invoicing.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you wanted to add something?
Just to add to that, be timely. As soon as I file a recipe story or turn in any recipes anywhere, because it's immediate. I have my invoice ready to go. And I've been very lucky. The companies I've worked with so far have all been on top of it. One of the first companies I worked with got me turned on to bill.com, and I used that app as well as Google Docs and the spreadsheets and everything initially. I'm still building up my business, and it's helped a lot. But yeah, so just be timely and don't be afraid to nag. If people are dragging their feet, be friendly, but be persistent and don't be afraid to follow up, because it's your money, you've worked for it. Be persistent.
Great. Maddie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I would recommend, like, really before you even start, like, get this stuff figured out, because when you get really busy, it's like the worst thing in the world to get so behind and like confused on how to invoice. And I'm like super guilty of doing that. One thing I wish I did before I really started my freelance business was like get all the QuickBooks set up, get all of your systems set up, so it doesn't become such an issue. I was using just like like Hannah said, PDFs and spreadsheets and stuff, and it's like, oh my god, it was like reconstructing a crime scene at the end of every year. So I would recommend just like right off the bat, get on QuickBooks or Wave or whatever works for you, and just stay really on top of it. And it will show you too, like this person is 90 days overdue or whatever. So you can like, keep track of it that way.
Right.
I was going to say one
Go
thing
ahead.
with that is I think when you're first starting out, or at least when I first started out, I didn't think I was legit enough to have like a QuickBooks account or like to, to pay that $10 or $15 a month. I just thought I'm not getting that much work. Maybe I can't afford it. But I really felt like once I switched to QuickBooks, it did set the tone. And like Maddie said, then I wasn't scrambling when it came to tax time, like figuring out all my income or expenses, like it does that all for you. And I just saved so much more time when I had that all set up. And I like it was in my first year when I went full time that I hired a financial planner who like walked me through setting it up because I didn't know how to use QuickBooks. So I think investing in those things at the beginning is super helpful. I think it saves a lot of time.
Great. And I also know that one of the main questions I hear a lot is, do you guys charge late fees? How do you handle that politely to make sure you still get paid?
I mean, I find it, maybe other people have different experiences, but unless it's like built into the contract, I think it's hard to enforce late fees unless it's like you put that before you even took the job. Like if you don't pay within 30 days, we add on 10% or something. I think it's kind of hard to enforce, but I don't know. Do you guys have better experiences with that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Maddie. I mean, like the things are set in stone from the get-go. So if you want to make that clear up front, make that clear up front. Have that conversation with the editor, the art director, producer, whoever's doing the shoot. I think that's on you if you start to bug them after the fact, right? You signed a license and contract agreement, it's set in stone, and typically it might not mention that, but ask that. Make sure it's in the contract agreement before you sign on to it. But yeah, I think Maddie's right. Like it really comes down to kind of figuring out that stuff beforehand. So if you're asking that question after the fact, you're already lost.
I think it also depends on the client, right? Like if you're working with certain publications, they probably, if it's not in there, then you probably can't do anything. But if you're working like for an event or from some other client, and this is why it's important to also have your own contract. Like if you have your own contract and you get them to sign it, and in it, I have a late fee in my contract. And I don't know, I think it's at right now 20%. I don't know if that's too low or if that's too high. I don't know, I just picked in the random number at the beginning. But I think having your own contract too, I think it's helpful. Or when you read contracts, you can negotiate. I've been hearing, I think it's Andrea Wise who was talking about, there's nothing wrong with negotiating contracts. If you see that there is no late fee in a contract, you could ask, like you could push back, be like, hey, do you do late fees, or what's the percentage that I could ask for? So I think that's something you can do too before you sign.
Great. So next question. What tools do you like or would you suggest? What makes your lives and your job easier?
I don't know. Spreadsheets are like my jam. I don't know what I do without spreadsheets.
Google Docs for sure. That has, I mean, I've been working on that for years, just in my personal life and at the Chronicle, and I've kept going with it, and it's so easy. And like I said, Bill.com has been great. I use an hours tracker app just to keep me on target for all my different projects, and also for some time management, I use something, it's a Pomodoro timer, Focus To Do app. A lot of apps. I'm using a lot of apps these days to kind of keep me on target, and as I'm learning in this first year and a half of building up a freelance life. And I would also say, especially in the last few months, I've been using the Calm app just for that kind of staying sane. And also they have a lot of great stuff, like before I go into meetings and things like that. They have a lot of professional focused things, confidence, stress management, performance anxiety. And I mean, that's an important part of this too. This really takes a toll. I'm learning. Like Maddie, I think said, this isn't for everyone, and I'm learning as I'm going. I've always really liked structure. I'm doing freelance right now. I don't know how long I'm going to do it. I'm going to see. I'm giving it a while, but it definitely helps. The mental health and finding your zen in this, especially during COVID, is really important.
Great. Hannah, did you have any suggestions?
Okay. Yeah. So like everyone said, Google Drive, that's where I organize everything. So I have like a work folder, and then in that folder, I have like a folder for every year. So since I started, so since 2017, 2018, 2019, 20, and then I have like a projects folder where I keep track of all the work that I'm doing, like all the personal projects that I'm doing. I also use QuickBooks. It's QuickBooks Self-Employed. So that's like cheaper than I think the regular QuickBooks. And also Wave is free. If everyone goes to, it's waveapps.com. So I know that one's free. And you can do accounting on it too. Like you can keep track of your money coming in. You can sync it with your bank accounts, which is really helpful. And then I was just introduced to this like new kind of like mood board app called Milanote or Milanote. I was using Pinterest originally, but Pinterest wasn't really, you can't like add words and things to it. So I used Pinterest to kind of collect images that I wanted to that like were inspiring for different assignments. But Milanote or Milanote is helpful for if you have an assignment and you want to prep ahead of time. And then another one called Stride, which keeps track of like your miles and your expenses. I think it's called Stride. QuickBooks Self-Employed, I think the app does that too. It keeps track of your miles. So you just put it on when you're driving and it tells you exactly which location, like where you're going from. So in the browser, you can just plug in that it was a work miles, which helps again at the end of the year instead of going back and collecting all your miles from all your assignments.
Yeah, I use MileIQ, which is a similar thing, but even when I'm like doing my invoices and stuff and I forget like how many miles I drove, it keeps track of all your drives and you can categorize them if it was business or personal. This might be like really self-explanatory, but took me years to do for whatever reason, was getting a credit card that like gives you points and putting your expenses on that. Like if you're fronting all this money, which you have to, another reason why you should have like potentially $10,000, before you do this, because a lot of a lot of publications will say, can you go fly to like Iowa or something? And you're fronting all of the costs. Like you are fronting the flight, the hotels, like everything. And, obviously you get paid back when you invoice, but getting like credit card points for that can like, you can take your own flight later, or like I've got an Apple Watch with like credit card points, like that kind of stuff. You should be able to benefit from having to front all those costs. So getting a good credit card's point. Took me a long time to do, but.
Great. So we'll do one more, and then there are a ton of questions coming in, so we'll switch over to that. So what should independent journalists do to prepare for slow weeks and months? I know work can be, very steady for a while, and then maybe you don't get anything for a month. So how do you guys kind of deal with that uncertainty and make sure you're still able to pay your bills?
I mean, for me, it's a challenge. I hate being slow. I like going. So this has been a really big pivot for me. I was very busy for a few months, and then COVID hit, and it's been flat. Things are starting to pick up a little bit here and there, but it's been extremely frustrating. It's hard. For me, I've found ways. I've been focusing on education, finding free courses, things to brush up on my SEO skills, to brush up on marketing, things like that. Just like looking for free or reasonable online classes to brush up on skills that I know are vital for me. I'm using this time to network like crazy. I mean, that is 70% of what I do right now. 70 to 80% of what I do is networking. And it can be really frustrating because you're planting all these seeds. And if you're like me, I'm like standing going like, grow, grow, grow. But it's just having to take a deep breath and be patient with it. And I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls or just phone calls, reconnecting with people I've worked over the years, outside of the newsroom. And it's great. It keeps you in the loop. You get to hear what's happening. I can, pick other people's brains as far as, what they're charging, what they're looking at here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. So that helps fill the time. It doesn't help fill my pocketbook, but it helps keep me going in these slow times. And it's potentially, really worthwhile and will help me in the long run.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to address that? Hannah?
Yeah, I think first is like being mentally prepared that it's going to happen. Like there are going to be slow times and slow moments. I think no matter how successful you are, and especially when you're first starting out. I know I wasn't working fully as a journalist. I was doing weddings, I was doing engagement photos, I did family photos, and then I worked part-time. So I think that's something to acknowledge, is that it's okay to have like a part-time job or have like diversifying your clients. So I think that will help too when you're first starting out. Or like Mason said, like even commercial. I think now most all independent journalists are doing other things and not 100% journalism. And if you get to do that, you're really lucky. I have a lot of like non-urgent to do things on a list, like work on my website, research like story ideas, or look in my community for story ideas, just practice like writing pitches and sharing it with friends. Even if I don't send it to anybody, I'm just like practicing. And so it's like part of my like slow days. And it's still, and then like organizing my archives, my hard drives, backing up, like as a photographer, backing up all my images. And also, like, I think during the slow times, there are times that I try to do other things, like non-photo things, because we can do other things like reading or working out, or I'm working on a garden, learning gardening and things like that. So, and reaching out to editors, like during COVID, like I was planning on going to DC in March, and then, everything shut down. And so recently I just started reaching out to photo editors and doing Zoom calls. I've asked them, I think I reached out to like 15 2 weeks ago, and like 4 got back. And so I met new editors over Zoom, and I'm asking them like what kind of pitches does your publication take? I'm like bouncing ideas off of them. So I was able to form, relationships with 4 new editors that I never worked with through Zoom. So I think that's another thing you can do, especially now during this time.
Great, thank you. So that does go into one of our questions. Tatiana asked, how do you guys network, especially during COVID-19, where you can't, take an editor out for a cup of coffee or something? Do you have tips for how they can build up that network of places that might hire them or places they can pitch to?
I mean, I think it's a lot harder. I mean, I like what Hannah said about Zooming with them. That's, I think, really a good idea right now. I mean, I would say before COVID, it's really important to have one-on-one time as much as you can. Like, I would make a trip to New York and DC like once a year if I could, just to sit down and like show work and just be like, hey, I'm a human, and just whatever. I think the one-on-one time makes a huge difference. So you're not just a name on a page or a website or whatever. Like, putting a face to the name makes a big difference. Obviously we can't do that now. So, I mean, I think that's a great idea. What Hannah's saying is just to like say, do you have time for a quick Zoom call, just so I can introduce myself and ask what your needs are, or like what kind of pitches you're looking for. I think that's a great idea.
I've definitely been taking advantage of Zoom, Google Hangouts, FaceTime, and even just good old-fashioned phone. And a lot of my connections I've made through different groups, online groups I'm a part of. A lot of different food professional, there's a Slack channel for Bay Area food pros that I've been on and starting to get more active in. And, I'm hanging out with a couple of people this week that I've met on there, and some Facebook food writer groups and things like that, and just reaching out and just, I'm approaching it of the, hey, I'm learning this whole, I'm learning and growing in this whole freelance role, and would love to, just get your thoughts. And especially I'm talking with folks that are, 20 years ahead of me in the industry, or, even 10, and who've been doing it for longer. And it's been really helpful. But just reaching out, and also being, I would say one thing, because everyone is so stressed and spread thin right now, of being mindful of their time. Reach out, ask, but be on top of it. Don't take advantage of it. Go in with a clear idea of whether you're going in to try to like sell yourself or just trying to pick their brain. And if they end up connecting you with someone in the future, it's great. But being really mindful of their time, but taking advantage of these different, all the technology to keep us in touch during this time.
Great, thank you. So it kind of goes into the next question. She asks, how do you make contact with editors, and how can you cope with the rejected blind pitches where I'm hearing nothing but she knows her ideas are good? So if you think you have a good idea but you're getting rejected or you hear nothing, what is your advice? I'm sure that happens to everyone all the time. So how do you guys deal with that?
I think it's important to realize that like a lot of these editors are getting hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, and they just don't have the time to read every single pitch. And especially if you don't have a prior relationship, it's just really tough for them to take the time. So I think in some ways, I know it's a long game. I mean, freelance success does not happen overnight. I feel like my first year or 2 or 3 of freelancing was like a joke. It really took a long time to just establish myself in a place and relationship with editors. But, I would say with pitches, like make it short and sweet, but like get to the point, make it, most people I think want pitches that, if it's like localized, it can also have a national angle and it's timely. And I would add, if you're a photographer, like 2 or 3 images just so they can see what kind of work you do. And then, this whole career is a lot about rejection. Like you're either not going to hear anything or you're going to get a ton of no's. You might get 10 no's before you get 1 yes. So just persistence, just email other people, wait a few days, move the pitch on to someone else.
Great. Hannah or Mason, do you have anything to add?
I think this is kind of related, but I think what I really learned at the beginning when I was freelancing is making work that I wanted to get hired for. And then when you get hired, you start building relationships with the editors. And then I think they are more likely to, when they see your name, in the inbox and you write like pitch, they might be more willing to at least read it and consider it. I am not the most successful with pitches. It's been more through through the connections that I've had with editors, and that's from like the visits or emails. I think building a network with other journalists, like photographers, has really helped me because people will share contacts and due to other editors, and will know which editor or which publication would be the best fit for your story. That's something to keep in mind. Like not every publication is a good fit for for your project.
Great, thank you. So I know, Sarah, you talked a little bit about branding. So a few people have questions about that. For those of you that do more than just journalism, if you edit, if you proofread, if you do commercial work, so is asking, do you have more than one brand? How do you guys brand yourselves if you do more than one thing? Do you do splits, or do you have, just your name? How do you guys kind of handle being able to diversify your work?
For me, my brand is food, is recipe content, food content. So that's my main brand. So across all of my social platforms, my Twitter, my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my website, it's all food focused, kind of more general, but food, recipe development, food writing, things like that. Where I get specific is when I'm doing a pitch or when I'm sending in a resume somewhere, if someone wants to see something, and I target and I tailor that to highlight what skills I think they might be looking for, what that company or publication is looking for in particular. But across my social, it's more the larger umbrella of food and recipes and food content production writing.
Great. Anybody do anything differently or have other advice? Maddie?
I think it's kind of important, like, to be able to do a lot of different types of photography for us. But like, if you don't want to do like still lives, don't include like a still life in your portfolio. If you don't want to do sports, don't include the sports in your portfolio. Like, I feel like a lot of journalism schools teach you to have, you know, one spot news, one, you know, sports picture, once whatever. Just like focus on what you want to do. Like Hannah said, create the work that you want to get hired for. That's really important. Sometimes I'll do something that's a little out of my comfort zone, but I think I try to like show my strengths and not just try to show like a diversified portfolio. I would just really like narrow in on what you want to do, what you want to get hired for, because it's gonna be really apparent in your work, like what makes you excited, what you feel passionately about, and editors are going to want to hire you for that.
Great, thank you.
Oh,
go ahead.
For my wedding work, I did have a separate website. It wasn't on my, I guess, my main website. So it's like Hannah Yoon, and then I have Hannah Love Yoon as my wedding website. So they're two separate Instagram accounts, two separate, I guess, brands. And then like what Maddie said, I think I've also learned over time with my main portfolio website, my Hannah Yoon one, I don't put any sports in because I'm like, I don't want to get hired for sports. So I'm not putting that in. I'm not putting in spot news, things like that. I felt like out of school, I was kind of told to have everything so I could be hired for everything. But I know what I want to get hired for now, which is mainly like portraits and like long form stories. So I think that's what I'm putting up on my website.
All right.
Yeah, for me, like, I think like it's important. I mean, I'm speak for just as a visual, you know, photographer, but if you're a photographer that just doesn't want to get into kind of commercial work, I think it's important to understand your vision. I think vision like is important because it is your brand. It's how commercial clients, art directors, producers are going to be looking at your work. I think also just having storytelling as a skill is a way that we can start to approach art directors, producers, and say, look, this is a marketable skill that we have. We're not just storytellers; we're actually storytellers, you know. And I think that's important to be able to kind of talk about as well. So your work should reflect all of that, whether like for me, like I do a lot of travel. So I do a lot of work for Airbnb. I've done a couple campaigns in the Middle East. You know, did some work with some North Face. And a lot of that work kind of intertwines with my style and vision in what I do in the editorial space. And so I think that that's important to acknowledge is that, again, like what Hannah said, is that that's, you know, you show what you want to photograph, and that's important. But in terms of just like, if you want to do other things like write, and I would try to recommend, you know, maybe setting aside another business for that. You know, it's okay to be handling multiple business fronts on that, you know. But yeah, I agree. But like, if you want to be hired for what you want to be hired for, show that, and make sure the vision is consistent across the work that you do. If you're gonna present yourself as a business, because that's important.
So someone did ask something related to that. How do you handle the rate discrepancies based on different types of work? Are you doing research in different spheres? Do you have different rates? Different invoicing? How do you handle sort of, because I know like journalism does not pay a lot, but I'm sure some commercial work does.
I'll jump into it. I think like one of the most important powers as a photographer is the ability to rate licensing and understand what your creative fee is. I think creative fee is part of knowing what it costs to do business. But a lot of it is your time, your creativity, the uniqueness of the shoot. So I usually break it up into 3 sections. And for what I do, typically editorial rates are pretty standard. You're not going to be able to negotiate too much unless there's hazard fees involved or unless it's a longer shoot. But I do corporate work and editorial work. But mainly figuring out what your cost is of doing business to stay afloat for all 3 of those sections. Like for me, I don't do only editorial. I do a lot of commercial, and that's how I survive. So most of my, I don't mind losing some business up front with editorial, because I have the kind of privilege to be able to kind of do that with doing a lot of commercial and whatnot. But yeah, I would say like a lot of it has to do with licensing. I check out Blinkbid. Blinkbid is a really good resource on how to break down photo shoots. It's also a great way to understand what the power of licensing is. Because when we think of getting a rate, we think of it as just like, a flat fee. And the reality is that in commercial space, that your rate, the way you make money is through the licensing. Your creative fee is almost paying up what the business, your business front is. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well, like that. They're two different things. And I think being able to price out and value what your work is on both corporate, commercial, is important. And so the short answer is like, yes, they do vary quite a bit. And there are lots of resources. And every market has a different rate. So if you're doing a campaign in San Francisco, for instance, that rate's going to be different from what it is going to be in Ohio. If you're doing a global campaign, that's going to be way different. If you're licensing 1 or 2 images that are going to be somewhere on a billboard internationally, that's going to be different. And so there are lots of resources for that to find those answers on what that is. And I think that's, again, just the power of the licensing, pricing licensing is something we don't acknowledge in the editorial space because it's just a flat fee. So yeah.
Great, thank you. So quite a few questions coming in. Okay. I had a pitch accepted, no contract was exchanged, and I was paid. Can I resell the piece? Any advice from you guys for that?
So was it published?
I don't know. Was it?
It's kind of a sketch thing.
Yeah.
So wait, you're saying that it's published and they want to resell it to someone else?
Republish it.
Republish it. I think it kind of depends on like the client, but most people, I think if a story is published somewhere, it's a lot less likely to get published somewhere else. Like they want more of the exclusivity. But I mean, just being like super open and being like, hey, this was published by X, Y, and Z. Are you interested in this? Or like, just being honest with everyone. And then if you do have a contract, making sure that there's no discrepancies, because some contracts say like, hey, this story is embargoed for 6 months. And you can't do anything with pictures for 6 months. So paying attention to that kind of stuff is important.
Or even if, I would not take the exact same story I pitched somewhere, and if it ran, I would not take it somewhere else. But you've done all this legwork. Think about a different angle, of whatever it was you researched. There could be, you're doing all this research on, I'm doing all this research on, grilled cheese a while back. Well, I did a story on, the ultimate grilled cheese and gave recipes for that. But so I wouldn't do that again necessarily. I would think of some other way to take the information I had gathered, contacts within that, and figure out a different, pitch, and kind of tweak it. But the exact same pitch I would not send to another publication personally.
All right. Great. So a few people have asked, how do you recommend blind pitching a project or story to an editor? Do you guys just email? Do you ask for a Zoom meeting? What do you find to be the most successful when looking for new work? No, nobody, nothing successful. Hannah?
I don't know if it's successful, but I think you just have to do it. Like you just have to try emailing. And if it's like I know through some people, it's been through friends or other like people in the industry who've been gracious enough to give me some context. So I'll be like, yeah, so-and-so passed your name off and I thought this story could be a good fit. I just watched a really great YouTube video with a bunch of photo editors that I can drop in the chat that's all about pitching. And one of them was saying, like, if you've never met with the editor and you've never had a relationship with them, I wouldn't pitch right away. I would first just like email them, introduce yourself like you do, as a human being. You're not going to just try and sell. It's like, you don't want to be too much of a salesperson. So just introduce yourself, tell them where you're located, the type of work you're interested in. Like the different topics that you like to cover, and then just tell them that you're available for work, or that if they ever need, and then they hopefully will get back to you. And if they don't, you can follow up within a week. But I think pitching to someone, unless they post it on Twitter, like I'm looking for pitches, if they haven't done that, then I think it can be a lot for editors. Like Maddie said earlier, they are getting so many emails from us, but also from like their coworkers and their own editors. So I think it makes sense to just introduce yourself at first, start building a relationship, and then hopefully look at what's happening in their publication, and then see if it's a good fit.
And to add to that, I would say, within your network or people, whether on LinkedIn or any groups you're in, who do they know? Be strategic about it and ask for an introduction. And I've had really a lot of success with that, of connecting to new people that are, in really interesting places that could be potential, opportunities to pitch in the future. But just be strategic about it, for sure.
Yeah, and just be patient too, because I've reached out to editors and never got a response back. But I said that stuff in my email, like where I'm based. Be very clear to drop keywords of where I'm based in Ohio. I often cover West Virginia and Kentucky and Pennsylvania, whatever. Because later they could be like, oh, who's in Ohio? Who's in Pennsylvania? And they're looking through their email and find yours. But I've reached out to editors, heard nothing, and then 6 months later got an assignment from them. So just because they're not responding right away doesn't mean they're not reading and potentially logging you into their database of people around the country. So don't get too discouraged, because it just it's a long game. Freelance is a very long game. Nothing happens overnight. It's just building up that snowball and over years, seeing how it grows. But it is a lot of patience has to go into this, and a lot of persistence, because there's a lot of rejection too.
And so a related question, a few people have asked, if you have a pitch, do you send it to a bunch of organizations? Do you just send it to one? How do you handle, pitching multiple places with an idea that you think multiple places might like? Anybody do that? No?
I'm only going to refer to that video that I posted, but in that video, I think a lot of them said you could send them out to multiple, editors, but be very transparent. Just tell them that you're sending it or pitching it to, and then if one of them gets back, just follow up with the other ones. Be like, hey, I actually just heard back from so-and-so, so hopefully I get to work with you next time. That's what I've learned. I think I've done it a few times, but I haven't gotten a lot of pitches accepted. So these are kind of hard questions.
Yeah, I would harken back to what Hannah said. I mean, just relationships are really important in this game. It's not I wouldn't approach, I usually always go to an editor I've worked with and be like, hey, let's have a conversation about this. Where do you see this happening? And so an open pitch is good, but what Hannah said, start with that relationship, have it be a conversation, grab a beer with, after COVID is done, grab a beer with them, have a conversation with that. Because I think even for producers or art directors, it's the same kind of concept with project based. It's about kind of bouncing ideas off each other, because editors will be like, I haven't seen this way. What, are you approaching it that way? And I think that's where you start to get the ball rolling with that. And so I haven't had too much luck just cold pitching. That's just it's mainly off conversation, or mainly off something like an editor is oh, I'd love to see this, or I haven't seen this. And, it just for me, I've had more success that way.
I definitely tailor. I don't like doing just blind pitches. I like tailoring and the conversations that you have. That collaboration process, I feel, really only makes an idea, a seed of an idea better. So definitely, like Mason said, work on those relationships. Ask what what are you looking for right now? What are things that are interested to you? Because I find that really helps me have more laser focus of what I want to do and how I can make it work for them. So I'm not just honestly wasting my time, which is money, just spinning my wheels, trying to come up with some great idea to send out that might not be picked up. Really talking with folks and editors and targeting what they're looking for and helping to move from there, for sure.
So a few people have asked about personal projects. Do you guys still have time to work on passion projects, personal, long-term project, or are you always hustling? How do you balance that?
I think personal projects are the best way to get an editor's attention, to be honest. Like, I think, and especially if work is slow right now, which it is for many, many people, like working on these projects is such an effective use of time. I think editors want to see what makes you like tick as a photographer. Like, what are you interested in? What are these like long form stories that you're excited about, because they want to see that kind of vision and what you could bring to a story for their, you know, publication. So, and that's a good way to get, I think, your foot in the door too, more than just like, here's some portraits or something, which is important too, but being like, here's this like really long-term story that I find, you know, joy working in, and I've done it for years. I've always found that that is what gets me noticed more with editors than anything else.
Yeah, I think like however you want to frame it too, because like for me, like the personal projects I do, like I like getting brands involved on this and like being like, okay, like I have a kind of a story, like and I want to like get brands involved, and I want brands to kind of like send me money and gear to go out and do those things. And so for me, like I just recently did a project for Orvis and a bunch of other small publications. It was just total personal project. We were like, okay, let's just get it done. Like, let's just reach out to some brands and see if they'll back it. And yeah, and like, so for me, like personal projects is kind of from what I like, just like doing. Like I like being outside. So let's maybe like let's go on a trip and get brands involved, and let's see if they'll sponsor this shoot. That's like how I kind of like get personal projects. And like, for me, it's like almost like I'm hacking a lifestyle choice. Like it's kind of this weird, like I'm doing what I love and also kind of photographing in that space that I love. And so that can be applied to brands, magazines, and editorial space. And it's just, you know, like for that, that is my kind of personal project and how I balance, continue to do work that's relevant for my brand as well as just doing what I like what I love doing. Because if you don't love what you're doing, then you're just in the wrong space, like you really have to have that kind of hunger and drive for that passion. So I don't know, it's not really personal work, but it's almost like it's not work at all. So yeah.
And I don't know, to follow up on that, like I would say really a small percentage of assignments you get are ones that you're like, oh my God, yes, this is so cool. Like a lot of them are just like, hey, great, probably not gonna look at this one again. So, keeping that spark alive for like why you got into this and why you do photography is really important. Because a lot of freelance sometimes it's really boring stuff, and it pays the bills, which is great, but keeping to work on those stories that make you excited about what you do is important.
Yeah, I would say when I first started out too, personal projects, people were telling me that it's really important. And again, going back to the whole show people what you want to get hired for. So in my first 2 years when I was part-time freelancing, I wasn't getting hired for the work I wanted to get hired for. It was more newsy things. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not really showing. And so once I started actually, when I went full-time and I started doing weddings, I was able to self-fund just doing my own. So I just started doing a portrait project, and I had no actually goals of even getting it published. It was really to just put it on my Instagram, and I just wanted to take pictures of other Koreans and talk to them, and just it was really for me. It wasn't really so that I could get money or get it published. And so it just happened that when I was like meeting some editors, they're like, what are you working on? I was like, well, I'm just working on this for fun. And then one of them was interested, and I was like, oh, this is actually something people are interested in, which I wasn't expecting at all. So I just feel like if you do things for yourself, I think, yeah, it makes a world of a difference in your career.
Great. So we have about 4 minutes left. So we'll end with a question. I hope each of you will answer. So we'll start with Mason. What was a lesson you learned the hard way that other independent journalists could learn from now? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I hate that feature. Man, I have made a lot of mistakes in my career, and it's okay to make mistakes. I think it's genuinely like, don't beat yourself up on it, because it's gonna happen. Whether it's like pricing out something, bidding out a license. I would say like your well-being for me is, I think, the most important. Like being happy, being okay with yourself and where you are in your life. I think that's important. And I disregarded that a lot during my years starting out, because I thought it was just like, I need to get network, I need to grind, I need to do this and that. And I think I eventually came to a point where I was like, I might be done with photography. I'm so burnt out on working. And, you know, I did a lot of work with the fires. I'm currently stuck doing protest stuff in Portland now. And it, you know, you gotta kind of come back down to earth and be like, okay, where am I at in my well-being? How am I feeling? Do you need to talk to other journalists? And just, you know, I think that is so underrated and not talked about. And so for me, that is something I learned the hard way from the get-go. And I think, you know, it's okay to be like, I need to take a break. I need to go on. I need to do me for a little bit. You know, that's important to acknowledge. So
Building off of Mason, for me, it wasn't a lesson I necessarily learned the hard way, but it was a very important lesson for me to learn early on. And it was through a colleague, friend at a conference, and just, you know, imposter syndrome is real, and you feel like you're the only one who has it. I found myself at this conference, and I was scared to initially network with people and talk with people, and that's what these things are designed for. And she basically was wonderfully blunt and was like, you aren't that special. Why? You're not that special. Everyone feels this way. You know, basically get over yourself. And that little thing, that little nugget I have carried with me for the last 8-9 years. And it's really helped me of like, everyone feels this way to some degree or another, and you just have to get over yourself and just do it, and try not, it's hard. I struggle with it every day still, but I really use it as a push of get over myself. You know, what can it hurt? It can't hurt to introduce yourself. You know, what have you got to lose? And just really get over that and be kind to yourself. You are your hardest critic. I know I am. And just being kind to yourself and just going with it. You have nothing to lose to reaching out to people and talking and showing how awesome you are.
Great, thank you. Maddie?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I think it's just really important to have a really trusted group of people around you who do the same thing when you're freelancing, that you can really like rely on and talk to, because when you're a freelance photographer, you are truly like a lone wolf, like one-man band, and it can feel extremely isolating and alone. So like building your own colleagues, your own community is so important. I have like I would say like 3 or 4 chat groups with different freelance photographers, and we're always like, oh my God, what is this? And it really helps a lot to like talk about even contracts or something that happened in the shoot that was like traumatic or whatever. Just having that community is so important. And then what Mason said too, something that I think only happened with COVID time, was like striking a balance between your personal life and work, and not making work 100% of it. Because before I was like forced to slow down, I mean, I was just like grinding so hard all the time. I was on my way to being super burnout. I was really like pushing my personal life away and only prioritizing work. And that's just not healthy. And life is way too short for that. So like, please make time to do stuff that you want to do. Please take care of your mental health. Please like see your friends, your family, like have a hobby, anything, because like this can't be your entire life. And that I only like figured that out through COVID when I was like forced to slow down. And I'm really glad I did.
Great. And Hannah?
I'll say two things. Like the first thing that I learned the really hard way was learning about taxes, to save money for taxes. I did it like my first year freelancing when my accountant was like, so you have to pay $5,000. I was like, but I only make 20,000. Like, how am I supposed to pay? So I learned really quick, saving money, putting money aside. I think I sent Kat some resources on like how to set your bank accounts, how to separate bank accounts. So really learning the financial side of the business, I think will save you a lot of time and headache and money. And then building off of what everyone else said, I think this idea that I've been talking with friends about this, like journalism can't be like contaminated by other things. You have to be purely a journalist and only a journalist, I think is a myth. And I think you can do other things. So even early on, I've only been in the industry for 5 years, but early on you would hear things like, don't have kids. Like that's not a good, way to spend your time. Like you have to be only doing journalism. And I think that having a whole life, whether you want to have kids or don't have kids, I'm not saying you have to have kids, but if you don't want to have kids, that's okay. But don't not have kids because the industry's somehow telling you not to, yes, have hobbies. You can do other types of photography, experiment. You can, I don't know, I just feel like that is something I've learned because I thought I had to fit a certain mold of what it meant to be a photojournalist. And I'm unlearning a lot of that, unpacking it, and kind of like relearning all the time through, like Maddie said, like through my friends. I have a ton of like WhatsApp chats, like all kinds of different WhatsApp chats. Like I just started a pitch club. I have a support network where we talk every Sunday morning. I had a mentor where we try to chat every other week. I feel like people building relationships, again, like whether it's with editors or the people in the industry, makes a huge difference. And I think we can challenge that lone wolf mentality. Like you don't have to be a lone wolf, even if at times it feels like it. I think we can make this actually into a whole and full like community where we're working and supporting one another.
Great, thank you so much. And I know we have a ton of more questions, guys, but we are out of time. So feel free to look on that tip sheet. There is contact information there for myself and all our wonderful panelists. So if you want any of them to expand upon something they said today, or you'd like to reach out to me and just get me to add something to the tip sheet that they talked about, I am happy to do that. Thank you all for your time and your advice. It is so wonderful, and I'm sure we could talk for many more hours, but I really appreciate you making time for this today.
Thanks, Kat. Good to see
Thank
you.
So much.
Nice to see all your faces.
Hi, thanks everyone.
Have a great day, everybody.
Nice to see y'all.